Bullies stole a black veteran's seat on a plane. Her phone call ended their trip. A story by Heartfelt Tales. Margaret Thompson adjusted her military service pin on her Navy blazer as she approached Gate B-12 at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. The 68-year-old retired Army sergeant had served her country with distinction for 25 years, and today she was finally heading home to see her granddaughter's college graduation. What she didn't know was that this flight would test her courage in ways she never imagined, and that one phone call would change everything. Before we dive into Margaret's incredible story, if you believe in standing up for what's right, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and don't forget to subscribe to Heartfelt Tales for more inspiring stories that remind us of the good in humanity. Margaret had carefully selected seat 6A 3 weeks ago when she booked her flight, a window seat in the premium economy section that she'd paid extra for with her pension money. She needed the extra legroom because of the shrapnel wound in her left leg from her deployment in Iraq, a reminder of the day she'd saved 3 soldiers from a roadside bomb. The airline had been accommodating when she explained her situation, ensuring she had the seat she needed for the 4-hour journey. As she boarded the plane, Margaret's heart swelled with pride and anticipation. Her granddaughter Sarah was graduating summa cum laude from medical school, following in the footsteps of her grandmother's dedication to service. Margaret had missed so many family milestones during her military career, but nothing was going to make her miss this one. She made her way down the aisle, pulling her small carry-on behind her, until she reached row 6. That's when she saw them, 2 young men in their 20s, wearing expensive designer clothes and sneering expressions. One was sprawled across her window seat, his feet propped up on the seat in front of him, while the other occupied the middle seat, with their belongings scattered across the aisle seat as well. "Excuse me," Margaret said politely, checking her boarding pass once more. "I believe you're in my seat." "I have 6A." The young man in her seat looked up with cold, dismissive eyes. "I don't think so, lady. We got here first, and possession is 9/10 of the law, right?" His companion snickered, making no move to gather their belongings. Margaret's voice remained steady, though her heart was beginning to race. "I have my boarding pass right here. I paid for this specific seat because I need the extra legroom due to a service-related injury." "Service-related injury?" the second young man mocked, looking her up and down with disdain. "What kind of service? Food service?" They both erupted in cruel laughter. The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. She had faced discrimination before, both as a black woman and as a veteran, but it never got easier. Still, she had learned long ago not to let others' ignorance define her worth. "I served in the United States Army for 25 years, she said with quiet dignity. "I was deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, and I earned every commendation on this uniform." The first young man rolled his eyes dramatically. "Sure you did. Look, we're not moving. Find another seat or get the flight attendant to give you a different one. We're comfortable here." Other passengers were beginning to stare, some looking uncomfortable but none willing to intervene. Margaret felt the familiar weight of being alone in a fight she didn't choose but couldn't walk away from. A flight attendant approached, having noticed the commotion. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, though her tone suggested she wanted to resolve this quickly and quietly. "These gentlemen are in my assigned seat," Margaret explained, showing her boarding pass. "I specifically requested this seat due to a medical need related to my military service." The flight attendant glanced at the boarding pass, then at the 2 young men who were now making exaggerated faces and whispering to each other. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but they're already settled in. I can find you another seat." There's an aisle seat in row 14 that might work. Margaret's heart sank. Row 14 was in the back of the plane, a regular economy seat with no extra legroom. The 4-hour flight would be agony for her injured leg, and she had paid specifically for the accommodation she needed. "I paid for this seat," she said firmly but respectfully. "I made the reservation weeks ago and specifically requested this accommodation." The flight attendant looked uncomfortable. "I understand, but we need to get this flight moving. The gentleman says he has a medical need too." She gestured to the young man in Margaret's seat, who was now dramatically rubbing his back. "Yeah, I have a back condition," he said with a smirk. "I need this seat more than she does. Look at me, I'm young and in my prime. She's old and probably doesn't even feel pain anymore." The casual cruelty of his words sent a ripple of shock through the nearby passengers. Margaret felt her eyes beginning to sting, but she refused to let these bullies see her cry. "Ma'am, please," the flight attendant said, her voice taking on a slightly impatient tone. "We really need to resolve this so we can depart on time." Margaret realized that the system she had served and protected for 25 years was failing her in this moment. The authority figure was siding with the bullies, and she was being asked to accept injustice for the sake of convenience. But Margaret Thompson hadn't survived combat zones and decades of military service by backing down when things got difficult. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't a rifle or a grenade, it was a phone call to the right person. "I understand you want to resolve this quickly," Margaret said calmly, reaching into her purse. "Give me just one moment to make a phone call." The young men exchanged glances and laughed. "What, you're going to call your lawyer?" the first one taunted. Margaret smiled for the first time since boarding the plane. "Something like that." She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. After 2 rings, a familiar voice answered. "General Morrison's office." "Hello, this is Sergeant Major Thompson. Is the General available? I have a situation that requires his attention." The young men's laughter died abruptly. Other passengers leaned in to listen. "Margaret," came a booming voice on the other end of the line. "Margaret Thompson? How the hell are you? I haven't heard from you since your retirement ceremony." "I'm doing well, General, but I'm currently on Delta Flight 1247 from Atlanta to Boston, and I'm experiencing some discrimination that I thought you should know about." General Morrison had been Margaret's commanding officer during her final deployment. She had saved his life during a mortar attack, and he had never forgotten her courage and dedication. Now a high-ranking Pentagon official with significant influence, he was also someone who didn't tolerate injustice. "Tell me what's happening, Sergeant Major." Margaret calmly explained the situation, speaking clearly enough for everyone around her to hear. She described how she had properly reserved and paid for her seat, how she needed the accommodation due to her service-related injury, and how she was being treated by both the passengers and the airline staff. "Put me on speaker, Margaret," General Morrison said, his voice taking on the tone that had commanded respect in war zones around the world. Margaret complied, and suddenly the general's voice filled the cabin around row 6. "This is General James Morrison, United States Army. To the flight crew, I want to speak with your captain immediately. To the passengers who have taken Sergeant Major Thompson's seat, you are disrespecting a decorated veteran who served this country with honor. She was wounded in action saving American lives, and she deserves not only your respect but your gratitude." The 2 young men had gone pale. The flight attendant was frantically trying to get the captain on the radio. Sergeant Major Thompson, the general continued, served 3 tours in combat zones. She received the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and the Combat Action Badge. She risked her life so that people like these gentlemen could have the freedom to travel safely. The fact that she's being treated this way is a disgrace. By now, the entire front section of the plane had gone silent. Passengers were staring at Margaret with new understanding and respect. Some were wiping away tears. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "This is Captain Williams. I'm told we have a situation involving a veteran passenger." "Captain, this is General Morrison. I need you to ensure that Sergeant Major Thompson receives the seat she reserved and paid for. She has a service-related injury that requires accommodation, and she's being subjected to discrimination by other passengers. General Morrison, I apologize for this situation. We'll resolve it immediately." Within minutes, the young men were being escorted off the plane by airport security. They protested loudly, claiming they had done nothing wrong, but their words fell on deaf ears. The airline staff, now fully aware of who Margaret was and what she had endured, were apologetic and accommodating. "Ma'am," the flight attendant said, her voice filled with genuine remorse, "I am so sorry for how this was handled. We'll be upgrading you to first class, and I want you to know that those passengers have been banned from flying with us again." As Margaret settled into her first-class seat, passengers throughout the plane began to approach her. A businessman shook her hand and thanked her for her service. A young mother with tears in her eyes told her daughter to remember this moment and what real courage looked like. An elderly man, himself a veteran, gave her a military salute that she returned with pride. The flight attendant brought her a handwritten note from the captain, apologizing for the initial response and thanking her for her service. The airline also provided her with a voucher for future flights and a formal apology letter. But the most meaningful moment came when a little girl, maybe 8 years old, shyly approached her seat. "My daddy says you're a hero," the girl said softly. "Thank you for keeping us safe." Margaret felt her heart overflow with emotion. This was why she had served, why she had endured discrimination and hardship, for moments like this, when the next generation understood the value of service and sacrifice. As the plane took off, Margaret looked out the window at the clouds below and thought about her granddaughter Sarah. Soon, she would be Dr. Sarah Thompson, ready to serve others in her own way. Margaret had shown her that when faced with injustice, you don't just accept it, you stand up, you fight back with dignity and strength, and you use every resource at your disposal to make things right. The flight to Boston passed peacefully, and Margaret arrived refreshed and ready to celebrate her granddaughter's achievement. But more importantly, she had reminded everyone on that plane that respect isn't about age or appearance, it's about character, service, and the courage to stand up for what's right. When Margaret walked across that stage to pin Sarah's medical school graduation pin, she did so knowing that she had not only served her country in uniform but had continued to serve by standing up against injustice, showing others that dignity and courage never go out of style. The story of Margaret Thompson's phone call spread far beyond that airplane. It became a reminder that heroes come in all forms, that respect must be earned and given, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice is simply knowing the right person to call. Margaret's story reminds us that courage isn't just about what we do in uniform, it's about how we stand up for what's right every single day. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear about the power of standing up for yourself, and subscribe to Heartfelt Tales for more stories that celebrate the resilience of the human spirit. Your support helps us continue sharing these important messages of hope and justice.